Hello, welcome. My name is Lynn O'Hara, and I'm the Director of Programs at National History Day. We are so excited to be coming back at you with our Ask the NEH Expert series. This is the time of year where our National History Day students are developing and revising their projects. You might be getting ready to go to a regional contest or revising your project between regional and your affiliate contest, or even your affiliate contest and the national contest. So we're going to talk for the next couple minutes for our students working on documentaries. So to get things started, I'm going to pass this off to Julia Wynn from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Hi, Julia.
Hi, thanks, Lynn, and welcome to our video series. Before we get started, I would like to just say a very few words about the National Endowment for the Humanities. NEH is a federal grant-making agency. We fund research, preservation, and education in the humanities, and of course, history is an important part of the humanities. NEH supports a wide range of activities, including the creation of books, museum exhibitions, and of course, documentary films. We also have a long history with National History Day, which we have supported since its founding in the 1970s. We continue to support the first place NEH Scholar Medals at the National Contest, and we also offer a special prize for excellent use of the historic newspapers found in Chronicling America. Chronicling America is a free online database that includes over 11 million pages of digitized historic American newspapers, and it's available on the Library of Congress website. We also have Edcitement, our education website, which is a key resource for both students and teachers. Edcitement has over 500 lesson plans and 400 vetted websites, as well as special National History Day features and lessons using Chronicling America. One other resource that's available to teachers is our summer programs. Every summer we offer a number of different programs in the humanities. These are professional development opportunities for teachers to study a variety of humanities topics. If you go to our website, NEH.gov, this is a great place to explore the resources I just mentioned, as well as many other things that we offer. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our presenter, Jason Cohn. Jason is the producer, writer, and director of the Peabody Award-winning film Eames, The Architect and the Painter, which was funded by the NEH and aired nationally on PBS American Masters following a successful run in theaters. In 2016, he produced a 45-minute profile of the Black Panther Party for an ongoing exhibition titled All Power to the People at the Oakland Museum of California. Jason's short documentary, Bible Belt Atheist, premiered on the New York Times Docs channel in 2015. Jason has made many other documentary credits in his 20 years as a filmmaker, and he's currently producing 3 films with funding from NEH. He has also worked in public radio, and he has written for Rolling Stone magazine, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, and other major periodicals. Thanks, Jason, for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're really excited to have you, and I know that our documentary students have lots of questions for you. We've polled them ahead of time, and I wanted to start by asking you, really, what do you love about making documentaries?
For me, I just felt that documentaries were kind of a perfect fit for my attention span, in a sense. My background is in journalism, and I did try different kinds of journalism, writing print and doing radio and all of that, and doing television, sort of more short form television. And I just felt that for my attention span, it was kind of perfect because I don't want to go, do a different story every day where, one day I'm doing education, doing something about education in schools, and then the next day I'm, doing something completely different. But I'm also not the kind of person who's just going to kind of do the same thing every day of my life, or just, sort of be involved in one area of study for the rest of my life. Documentaries allow you to get really deeply involved in a subject or in a story or a topic for 1 year, 2 years, in some cases, actually it's more like 5 or 6 years, to be honest. But that's sort of an amount of time that I can really get deeply involved in the topic, but also know that I can move on. There's something waiting for me after that, and it can be very driven by by my curiosity. You know, I do stories for the most part that are based on things that I'm interested in. You know, it's stuff that I choose to pursue because of something that I've read about or something that I've seen or a conversation that I've had that made me interested enough in something that I just started looking into it on my own and, you know, reading or making phone calls just because I'm interested in it. And then, you know, you have to make that really important call about whether it's interesting enough that other people would want to know about it. And, you know, are you willing to spend the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years working on it? But, you know, it's very much driven by what interests you. It's not so much driven by, you know, what other people tell you to do. And I love that about it.
Definitely. Our students, many of them have been researching. They've been kind of started with their topics, many of them back in August or September, and they've done a lot of research. And I wanted to ask kind of, how do you approach the process of making a documentary once you have kind of the topic chosen and some background information? How do you begin?
Well, you know, I'd say that the first really difficult step is making that first phone call. It's easy to sit on the internet and read articles and read what other people have to say about stuff, and you're kind of cocooned in your own space where, you know, or you pick up a book and you read it in bed and you feel like you're, you know, developing the background to understand the topic, but it's very safe. And the hard part is when you pick up the phone and you call someone who does not know you, does not know anything about you, and you have to say, you know, hey, my name is blah, 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 and I'm interested in making a documentary on the subject, and I know that you know a lot about it because you wrote this article, or you were there, or you know, you wrote a book, or you're a professor, you know, at an important university, and this is your area of study. And, you know, I need you to spend the next half hour or hour with me telling me everything you know, or helping me, you know, sort of figure out what my next steps are, you know, should be. That's a really, really difficult call to make just because you feel so stupid at first, you know. But that's really what our work is. You know, our work is going from stupid to smart. And once you've gone from stupid to smart on a topic, then you're in a position to bring other people, you know, on that journey. But that's sort of the first step is, you know, obviously just getting, you know, starting to get, you know, past being ignorant on the topic. And that means, you know, really reaching out to people, you know, documents, articles, books, all of that's really important. But in the end, documentaries are about people, and you have to reach out to people and start having conversations.
I think that's a really good point, though. But you mentioned that, you know, you really put your research in first. You read your books, you read your articles, you read your secondary sources and your primary sources. You do talk to people. You have really good questions. You're not just saying, you know, tell me everything you know about the Wright brothers, but instead you've got some really good ways to formulate that. What are some challenges that you faced either writing or producing or directing that maybe has a lesson that our students can learn from?
Well, every project that I've been on has different challenges. So that's a really hard question to answer. You know, I'm in the middle of producing 3 different films right now, and each one has different challenges. So I'm not sure that I can answer that exactly. You know, I would say that probably the broadest challenge that we all face, you know, especially people making history films, is starting to learn the difference between information and truth. There's so much information, and you can't make a film just by putting all the information into the film. You have to whittle it down to find the truth of what your story is. And I think that especially for high school kids, that's a really important thing, because, you know, when you're in high school, most of the time, you know, you're being tested or you're told to write an essay, and what you're really being asked to do is tell me everything you know. What do you know on this topic? So, relay all of your information from your brain, regurgitated onto the page, and it's about information. What do you know? And documentaries are not really like that. Obviously there's a lot of information in documentaries, but if that's all it is, then you could read a magazine article or an encyclopedia article or a Wikipedia article and get the information. Telling a story is much more about finding the truth within all that information. So a lot of it is sort of stripping away the extraneous information, the unimportant information, to get at something which is a more fundamental truth of what you want to say about the topic. My mentor put it in terms of the relationship between information and emotion. He would always tell me that emotion has to come first, and then people can accept information once they've bought in because they're emotionally invested in your story. You have to give them sort of something emotional first, and then you can deliver information. I'm not sure that I see it exactly that way. I see it more as a relationship between information and truth, and sometimes it's very hard to tell the difference. But the process of making the film, I think, is very much a process of sort of stripping away unnecessary information to get at the fundamental information, which basically becomes the truth of your story.
We talk a lot about it. We talk about the idea of analyzing the information, not making it a book report or a Wikipedia article where you just tell us what happened in order, but what really matters and why it matters, because that's kind of part of what historians do. Here's a question that we get a lot. Some students choose documentary topics that are relatively recent, so in the 20th century, where there's photographs and videos pretty easily available, while other students choose topics further back in history where, quite frankly, film didn't exist and photographs may or may not have existed. Can you give some suggestions for students who are working on those earlier topics in order to help illustrate what they're talking about in their documentaries?
Yeah, first of all, I would say bad choice. No, it's obviously it's a visual medium, so the availability of images is one of the first things I look for. It's one of the key criteria for whether I would try to tell a story or not. But having said that, there are times, even in a story which is generally rich with imagery, there will be times when a part of your story just doesn't have appropriate images, and or there's no photographs, there's no video that you can cut in, and that requires you to be creative. And the good thing is that constraints like that do give you the impetus to come up with solutions that are creative solutions, which in some ways can make your film a much better film, just because it's really a chance for the director, the filmmaker, to sort of give a little bit of themselves, something that nobody has thought of, a different way of approaching something. This isn't completely original, but this is something that we did recently. We just did this this project for a museum here in Oakland, California, about the Black Panther Party, which was this protest movement here in Oakland in the late 1960s and early 1970s. It was part of a museum exhibition, and the museum exhibition was just loaded with photographs. It was, photographs and moving images from the time, because there were a ton of them. Obviously, the Black Panther movement, the Black Panther Party got a lot of attention, and there was a lot of photography. So for the profile of the people who were involved with the Black Panther Party that we did, the decision was made, along with the museum, that we wouldn't use those photographs because it would just be sort of redundant with what was going on in the exhibition. And we wanted this movie that we were making to just feel different from everything else that was part of the exhibition. So we said, we're not really going to use photographs, maybe a little bit here and there, but for the most part, the 45-minute film was just going to be based on interviews with people without, cutting to images, which is what you usually do. And it created, a creative challenge for us. How are we going to do it? And what we did was we decided to do every interview with 2 cameras, one face on, looking straight at the person like you would normally do an interview, and then one shot in profile from the side. And we made the editing of those 2 camera angles be a kind of dance, where sometimes the frontal image would be full screen, sometimes the side image would be full screen, sometimes the frontal image would be just on the right side of the screen, and at the same time the profile image would be on the left side of the screen, or we would reverse it, or it would keep moving kind of in a dance. And it took something which is kind of could be kind of boring, just an on-camera interview, somebody looking at the camera the whole time, and turned it into something that's actually pretty dynamic and actually kind of engaging to watch for 45 minutes. And we've been really surprised to find that people will sit in the museum, on one of these little benches in the museum and watch the whole thing beginning to end for 45 minutes, which really shocked us because we didn't think that it would hold people's attention well enough. But, it turns out that you can do that if the story that somebody's telling is good enough, which in this case it was. So, I mean, that's just an example of being, creative, and just kind of using whatever you can to solve the problem. Another thing that people do is you look for something that you can shoot, which is maybe a metaphor for what you're talking about. It's not the thing itself, but it evokes a mood, or it evokes a concept, or it evokes an idea or a thought about the thing that you're trying to say. And then you film that in a, maybe a poetic way, an evocative way that just sort of expresses something that you want to say about whatever it is that the interviewee is talking about. And you use that as imagery. There's lots of things that you can do. It definitely, the lack of should never be, a reason not to tell a story. But I will say that it is part of the criteria for why I choose a story is the availability of those images.
Another question that students often ask us is about using music in your documentary. And one of the things is make sure that the music is appropriate to the time period and the music is appropriate to the subject matter. But I also often tell students to make sure the music doesn't take over the story, to make sure that the volume of your music is appropriate so that a narrator or a speaker can still clearly be held. Jason, do you use music, and what are some tips that you can give students for using music?
I do use music. I think, music is a really important part of storytelling, or it can be, because music is pure emotion, and a story should have emotion. But there are definitely lots of landmines with music where the music can be, I think what you were saying, overpower a story. So it's not just the volume, which of course is important, that the music shouldn't be so loud that you can't hear what people are saying and all of that. But also that music has the ability to be manipulative. If the melody is too strong, or if the music is too forceful in a way, it's telling people what to think in a way that can have a sort of a negative effect on the viewer. People don't want to be told that this moment they're supposed to, feel something. So it should have an almost, I think it should have a lot of the time an almost subliminal kind of effect, where the music is there and it's helping your story, but it's not driving the story in a way that is sort of conscious and making people aware of the music all the time. But music is very much a personal thing, and I think that every filmmaker uses it differently. Some filmmakers really do let the music be kind of foregrounded. Other filmmakers really dip it down very low so that you almost don't know that it's there. we've tried lots of different things. You know, in the Black Panther thing that we just did, we felt that the stories that people were telling were so emotional that we didn't want music that was going to tell people what to think at all, you know, or what to feel at all, because the stories themselves were doing that work. So we tried something which we had never done before, and we put in, for a soundtrack, we just put in a drum track. We hired a jazz drummer to play, you know, beats and rhythms, and the rhythms kept shifting, and you know, sometimes they would be really forceful, and sometimes they would be more laid back. But what we felt was that since we didn't have a lot of images, that the soundtrack, the drum track, could kind of provide a kind of energy to, you know, keep the story moving forward, but without telling people what to feel. And it worked really, really well. And that's something that we had never done before. There are other times, you know, when I'm trying to figure out what a film is about, sometimes the music will tell me. You know, I've been in a situation where I was working on something where I really didn't know what I wanted the film to be until I heard a song, and the song told me had exactly the mood that I felt when I thought about the person that I was making the film about. And it was a kind of sadness, a kind of, you know, a soulful kind of sadness. And I realized that that's what the whole film was for me, was about expressing that mood. And then, of course, I couldn't license the song because it was by this band that, you know, wouldn't sell me the song. But so then I just hired somebody to sort of evoke the same feeling, and he did a really good job with it. So music is a very personal thing. It's very much about emotion. And then the other thing is that silence is a kind of music too. And you have to learn when silence is better than sound. There are times when music just absolutely gets in the way, and you need to learn when to back off and let silence be the music of your story, because that's really, really important. If you have music all the time, then it loses its power.
I think those are some really good tips. I would also remind our NHG students that your music should appear in your annotated bibliography, because you have to give credit to the sources that you use and explain why you chose a particular artist or a particular song to kind of evoke that feeling, like you were saying. Okay, now here's another issue. One of the things that our students are, their documentaries have to be 10 minutes. So literally from the first sound or image to the last, including the credits, is 10 minutes long. So that's not a lot of time. So oftentimes students will do kind of a first cut or a rough cut, and they'll find that their documentary is 12, maybe 14 minutes long. Can you give some tips about how to edit and kind of how to decide what ends up on the cutting room floor and never makes the final cut of your documentaries?
Yeah, again, there's clearly no formula for that. You know, the only formula for it is that it's hard work and that it takes time and it is iterative. You know, that means that it's a process of doing it and then redoing it and then redoing it and redoing it. So, you know, editing is, more than anything, editing is subtracting. And that's a really important thing. It's sort of like, there's a famous line by Mark Twain. I think he was writing a letter to a friend of his, and he said something like, "I'm sorry that I wasn't, I'm sorry that this letter is so long. I didn't have time to write a shorter one." And which is sort of classic Mark Twain, because it seems funny, but it's also really true. It takes longer to write a good short story or a good short letter than to write a long one, because it's very much about getting all of your ideas on paper and then cutting out the ones that aren't important. And, it's like sculpture is another metaphor. You start out with this big block of stone, and then what you're doing is you're subtracting the stone that isn't part of your image, that isn't part of your story, until you get to the meat of it, the thing that's your story, the heart of it. And so it's really about taking away what is not essential. And so one thing that we do with that is first of all, we try to give ourselves time, because if you're looking at the same thing every day, you don't have fresh perspective on it. And sometimes it's really hard to know what is essential. So if you have time and you cannot look at something for a day or two and then come back to it, that can be really helpful. The other thing we do is we bring in other people to look at it and tell us, you know, where are you getting bored? You know, when do you start to lose interest? When does your interest perk back up? That'll tell you something important. And sometimes the, you know, people that you bring in will try to give you advice on, you know, what you should do. Well, you don't necessarily have to listen to that. You don't have to listen to people's solutions for your problem, but you should listen to people when they tell you where they're bored, you know, where they're not interested, because that's telling you something important. You'll probably be able to come up with a better solution than they will because you know your story better, but you should always listen when people are telling you that this is not interesting to them, you know, this is boring. That's important information.
That's a really good point about test audiences, because we always encourage students to show your classmates, show other teachers in your school, if they're around. If they live in a retirement community, invite their friends. The more people who see it, the more people can give you that really good feedback.
Yeah, I usually start by editing myself because it's cheaper. You know, I can save money by not hiring an editor. But I know that there's always some point where I kind of run out of steam and I need somebody else to come in and be the other set of eyes. And then I hire the editor and just let them go to work, you know, on it for a couple of weeks. And then I come back in and then I'm fresh. And so, you know, I definitely, well, maybe there are some people who can do something beginning to end just completely with their own vision. But speaking for myself, I always need to bring other people in to look at things and to provide, you know, a fresh perspective. And, you know, that bouncing off, that collaborative part is part of what makes documentary so much more fun than, you know, just writing articles for a magazine, for example. That you're exchanging ideas and you're learning from another person what they find interesting and what they don't find interesting. So all of that's really important. And the more people that you can bring in, people whose ideas that you respect, that you can bring in to get their thoughts, the better.
I'd like to kind of end on this question. One of the things, oftentimes our students have really good intros. They do a nice job developing a story and developing their thesis. But sometimes they really struggle with conclusions and knowing how to end it, especially, you know, 10 minutes isn't very long. But it's important to have a defined conclusion. Can you give some tips to students for creating a clear conclusion without just kind of going back and re-saying what they said in the beginning of their script?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how clear, you know, it's not an essay necessarily. So I'm not sure that a conclusion needs to be clear exactly. And, you know, and there's definitely no formula because every documentary is different. Every story is different. My feeling is that a film should end on a forward-looking note when possible, rather than on a backward-looking note. I also think that a film can end on a question mark rather than on a period or an exclamation point. I think, you know, you definitely want people, part of your job is to answer questions for people, right? So you do want people to walk away feeling that their original questions were answered, but I also think that you want them to hopefully walk away with a whole new set of questions that they may want to pursue on their own. You know, I definitely have there's no formula for this. We call it a kicker, you know, how do you end it? And when I'm doing my interviews, I'm always looking for that thing that somebody says that feels like it's the right note, you know, it's the right kind of kicker note, that it's looking towards the future, but it's not necessarily conclusive. It's more of a question mark, you know, about what will this mean, you know, to us going forward? What will this mean to future generations, maybe? I think that those are the kind of notes that are open-ended enough that it leaves people, you know, sort of wondering and maybe willing to pursue questions on their own.
Excellent. Well, Jason, thank you so much for sharing your time and your talents with our NHD students. I'm going to
Thank you.
turn things over to Julia Wynn to wrap us up today.
Thanks, Lynn, and thank you, Jason, for being a part of our video series. I would like to remind our viewers that NEH offers a variety of resources to National History Day students and teachers, including the ones I mentioned at the beginning of the video: Chronicling America, Incitement, Professional Development for Teachers. But I would also just remind you about your state councils. Every state has a humanities council, and many of them are involved in National History Day. So reach out to them as well. And with that, thanks again.
Thanks so much, and good luck with your projects for National History Day 2017.